Amelia Hart loved quiet Sundays. After spending the morning volunteering at a youth shelter for LGBTQ plus kids, she wanted nothing more than to sit somewhere normal, somewhere anonymous, just for a while. She pulled into a busy McDonald's on the outskirts of Phoenix, the desert sun painting the asphalt in dizzy waves. Inside, the place was alive with the smell of frying oil and the chaotic chatter of families. Amelia tucked herself into a corner booth, smoothing her faded Be the Light t shirt over her jeans. She kept her head down, wrapping her hands around a cup of iced coffee, hoping to blend into the ordinary noise of life, but even here she could feel it. The stares that lingered too long, the whispers that weren't quite whispers. She was used to it. Still, some days it wore thin. Today, she tried to shake it off. She noticed a small boy at a nearby table. His shirt was a size too big, the sleeves swallowing his thin arms. He clutched the battered toy truck tightly to his chest. Sitting across from him was a sharply dressed man, his posture rigid, his eyes flickering coldly whenever the boy so much as shifted in his seat. Something about the tension between them made Amelia's stomach turn. The man looked like he could snap the boy in half with a word. The boy's eyes kept drifting to Amelia. Once, twice, three times. Each time, his gaze was more desperate, more searching. Finally, he slid off his chair. Amelia watched him shuffle across the sticky tiles, his tiny feet moving hesitantly, his toy truck clutched like a lifeline. He stopped at her booth, eyes wide and glassy. He leaned close, so close she could smell the faint syrupy sweetness of apple juice on his breath, and whispered, trembling, "He hurt my mommy. She's not waking up." Amelia froze. For a heartbeat, the world tilted sideways. She looked down at the boy, Ethan, the name stitched onto his faded backpack, and saw a raw, pleading terror in his eyes. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She fumbled for her phone under the table and called 911, her fingers shaking as she whispered the situation to the operator. But even as she spoke, she saw the man rise from his seat, smoothing down his suit jacket with slow, deliberate precision. His eyes locked onto Ethan, then flicked to Amelia. The smile he pasted on was thin and cold. He approached, steps slow but heavy with purpose. "Sorry about that," he said smoothly, his voice oily with false charm. "Ethan's my nephew. He's a curious little thing. Time for us to get going now." Amelia stood, instinctively placing herself between Ethan and the man. "He's staying here," she said, her voice steady, louder than she intended. The man's smile slipped just slightly. "You really don't want to get involved," he said, his tone dropping, his words heavier. Amelia didn't move. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "I already am," she said simply. The man's hand twitched, like he was deciding whether it was worth the risk. A few parents nearby were watching now, pulling out their phones. A young employee behind the counter looked on nervously, holding a tray she had forgotten to deliver. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The man's mask cracked for just a second. He muttered something under his breath and started to back away. Amelia crouched down beside Ethan, who was shaking violently now. "You did the right thing," she whispered to him. "Stay with me. You're safe." The front doors burst open. Two officers strode into the McDonald's, scanning the room. Amelia raised her hand slightly. The boy clung to her leg. The man tried to slip past, muttering about misunderstandings and wasting his time, but the officers blocked his path. One officer knelt to Ethan's level, speaking softly. The other questioned the man, who was now visibly sweating despite the cool air. Ethan pressed closer to Amelia and, with a small nod from her, whispered to the officer, "He hurt my mom. She's still at home. She won't wake up." The officer's face tightened immediately. He signaled to his partner. "We're going to need backup," he said. The man stiffened. He started to argue, his voice rising, talking about lawsuits, talking about slander, insisting they were making a mistake. But no one was listening to him anymore. They were listening to Ethan. As the officers cuffed the man and led him outside, the little boy sagged against Amelia, exhausted from holding in his fear for so long. She hugged him gently, careful not to overwhelm him. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Braver than most grown-ups I know." The restaurant slowly resumed its normal hum, but a thick tension still hung in the air. Customers watched as the squad cars pulled away, taking the man into custody. Amelia stayed kneeling beside Ethan until more officers arrived, including a social worker, who immediately began speaking to him in soothing tones. An officer knelt next to Amelia. Ma'am, he said, voice low, thanks to you, we may have just stopped something a lot worse. Amelia shook her head. Thank him, she said, nodding toward Ethan. He's the one who spoke up. The officer smiled and placed a hand gently on Ethan's small shoulder. We're going to find your mommy now, he promised. The hours that followed were a blur. Ethan led them to a small rundown house about 15 minutes away. The front door was cracked open. Inside, the living room was a disaster. Overturned furniture, broken glass, the signs of a struggle. On the floor, barely conscious but alive, they found Ethan's mother. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital while detectives processed the scene. Evidence found in the man's abandoned car and briefcase revealed far worse plans. Plans to abduct Ethan and records of controlling, abusive behavior toward the boy's mother. It was clear now just how much danger they had been in. At the hospital, Amelia sat beside Ethan while doctors worked on his mother. His little hand gripped hers so tightly she thought he might leave a bruise, but she didn't mind. In the sterile light of the emergency room, Amelia thought about how close the boy had come to slipping away unnoticed, about how many others might not have been so lucky. Hours later, a doctor emerged, pulling down his mask to reveal a relieved smile. She's going to be okay, he said. She's a fighter. Ethan buried his face in Amelia's shoulder and sobbed with relief. The next few days were a mix of healing and processing. Social workers praised Ethan's bravery. Local officers who visited told him he was a hero. Amelia stayed by his side as much as she could. When Ethan's mother, Sarah, finally woke and saw her son safe beside her, she wept uncontrollably, clutching him to her chest. Amelia stood back, her own eyes misty. Later, as Sarah recovered, she turned to Amelia. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Her voice cracked. You saved us. Amelia smiled, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. You saved yourselves, she said. I just listened. Before Amelia left, Ethan pressed something into her hand. His old, battered toy truck, now glued back together by a volunteer at the shelter. For you, he said shyly, because you fixed everything. Amelia knelt, cradling the truck like a precious jewel. I didn't fix everything, she said, voice thick with emotion, but I'll always be here if you need me. As she walked out into the bright desert sun, the words she carried with her weren't ones she spoke out loud. Maybe the ones who stand out are the ones who stand watch. And sometimes that's exactly what saves the world.